Hey guys, Chris here with the Good Old Gamer. So first off, I'm not feeling very well, so if I sound a little strange, and that's also the reason why I'm not going to be on camera here today, so I just wanted to let you know that's the reason why. So I've been going ahead and in my rest mode, I've been keeping up with YouTube, and it seems that the entire community is focused on the new Geforce RTX. This makes sense since we're just a few days away from these GPUs being the reviews coming out from reviewers and the GPUs actually launching. So we're right around the corner from this, but this doesn't seem to have slowed down people's enthusiasm to try to gobble up whatever information that they can and continue the discussion. And I think that's really what's important here, is that the community as a whole really wants to talk about these GPUs, and everybody has their own opinions one way or the other. So that's what we're going to go over here today. I'm going to play both sides of this argument, both the community side, and then I'm also going to play devil's advocate, because there's a lot of stuff that people are not taking into account when they're looking at these new GPUs. So that's what we're going to take a look at here today. So stick around and check it out. Now, the reason why I'm using this image, or basically just sticking with this website, is because this is where most of the contention is coming in. We have the brand new Geforce RTX 2080, and it's launching at $799. The reason why I'm going to stick with the RTX 2080 for this sort of discussion is because Nvidia actually gave us some numbers that we could work off of with the 2080. We don't know anything about the 2080 Ti, nothing that's concrete, so this we can at least talk about here. But the major issue is the increased price point. We're going up from $699 from the 10 series, now at $799. Now, a lot of people have been making the arguments here saying that, well, this is crazy because, GPUs used to be a lot cheaper and this and that, and this argument is technically valid. So I went ahead and just made up this quick little chart here from the GTX 580 all the way on up to the brand new RTX 2080 to put things into perspective. So we have the 580, it came out back in November 2010 at 520 millimeters squared. So this is a large die GPU. It's actually very similar to that of the RTX 2080. I'm not going to go over each and every one of these specs. I'm just going to highlight some of the big ones. TDP at 244 watts and $499. This was the best and fastest GPU that Nvidia could produce at the time on the GF110 chip. And they launched at $499. Now, the important bit is the performance gain over the GTX 480 was about 24%. To get all of these numbers, I was just using what Tech PowerUp has on their graph here for relative performance gain. So you see 23% faster on the 680. So that's how I went ahead and calculated these numbers. You can go ahead and look them over yourself. This is just to give us a rough estimate of where things were. Anyway, continuing on. So once again, as I just showed you, 23% faster on the GTX 680. Now this is the GK104 chip, and this was the first time that the X80 line was not the top tier performer. This was a second tier chip, and it was much smaller, but it still net about the same performance gain that we saw on the 580. Came in at the exact same price point and consumed much less power. So even though that this was a much smaller chip, cheaper to produce, it did have benefits in the fact that it wasn't as power hungry, it cost the same amount, and you still got about the same performance gain. So overall, nobody really had a problem with this because the price and performance gain were in line with what we were expecting and what we were used to. Now, the GTX 780 is based on the exact same architecture, same node. There was really nothing different here. So the only thing that they could do was produce a bigger chip. So that's why it's 561 millimeters squared versus the 294, but that was needed to get this extra 24% performance. Now, because of how big the die was, Nvidia wanted to make some money because their costs went up. So they launched the GPU at $649 instead of $499. Now, a lot of people were not super thrilled with this at the time because you're getting the same amount of performance increase, but now you're asking another $150. The consumers did not care so much about the TDP, and they never really do. This only comes up when people get nitpicky. But an extra $150 for the same performance gain, that was a bit of an issue. And until the R9 290 and 290X came out, this GPU stayed at the $649 price point. However, this is where trends seem to have changed, with the GTX 980 going back down to the GM204, so we went from the biggest chip that they could produce, the biggest, baddest, best thing that Nvidia could produce. Now we're going back to the budget range once again. But once again, you can see that that's not really a big deal, as performance gains were actually higher than what we were seeing traditionally. So once again, nobody really cared that much because the performance gains were there to back it up, and it was actually cheaper. So for $100 less, okay, it's smaller, cheaper for Nvidia to produce. It's much more energy efficient, which, granted, it's nice when it's there, but like I said, people don't care at the end of the day. But the big thing was cheaper and even more performance. So that's the reason why the 9 series was so popular, is because of the large performance gain and the very good price points. Moving up to the GTX 1080 is a little bit different, once again using the 104 chip, so still budget range. We're looking at a 314mm square die. This is where I had a lot of problems because this is very small. This is very inexpensive to produce in comparison to something like this. Now, it is a brand new node and there were some other issues there. So, all right, yeah, maybe some cost would be a little bit higher, but because it is smaller, yields overall will be better. TDP is still roughly in the same ballpark. It's a little bit higher, but the price point jumped up another $150 over the previous generation. Now, the only reason why people didn't really care that much was because the performance gain here was significantly higher than what we were traditionally used to. So you got a very large performance increase at very reasonable power consumption, and a lot of people could justify this price point. And those that couldn't waited until it came down to its $599 MSRP price, or waited until much later on when they were heavily discounted. Now finally, we make our way over to the 2080. So once again, it's a 104 chip, 550mm squared. So this is large. This is competing. It's actually bigger, or right on par with the old generation's top size die. Now, this isn't confirmed. This is just kind of the rough estimates that people have out there, but it does seem to be right in the ballpark of where this is going to land. TDP on that's 225 watts, much like the old previous generation's big boy flagship GPUs. It's right in line with that. However, it's now sporting a $799 price tag, and this is what's really got people's blood boiling. Now, even at $649, people weren't too thrilled with that. The big thing is that this GPU is more in line with the 780 and 580 as far as die size goes, and the previous generation's much smaller GTX 1080 was able to command such a high price premium. Nvidia is like, well, this costs a lot more for us to make, so we might as well try to get some more money out of it. Now, the big issue here, I think, is people are seeing this 30 to 35-ish% performance increase with this price increase, and that's really not okay because people have memories. You know, we can remember back when we got similar performance gains and the price actually went down. At the very worst, I think people would have been okay if this just remained the same, and I think that would have been okay. So where am I getting this performance number from? Well, you can go ahead and check out this video right here where I actually went ahead and did the analysis, but I will show you here real quick. This is what Nvidia has given us. This is it. This is the only performance numbers that we know on the RTX cards in relative comparison to the old 10 series cards. Now, the DLSS, like I said, this is a feature that we don't really know enough about, so I would just ignore these numbers entirely and just look at the dark green versus the gray. This makes sense. And if you look at the numbers going across the board and take out the fact that a lot of this stuff is heavily favored for the new architecture using things like HDR and newer APIs such as Wolfenstein 2 here with Vulkan, if you discount a lot of that, overall, most of us are expecting a 30 to 35-ish across the board performance increase from the 1080 to the 2080. Just to throw in a little bit of news into this video, if you guys haven't heard, the Geforce RTX reviews were supposed to go live on September 17th. These have now been pushed back to September 19th, which is literally right before these cards are supposed to be shipping. So I think this is in a bid to go ahead and generate more pre-orders. So that's another thing I think a lot of people out there are going to be like, this is a little fishy. I don't know why they would be doing this at this point. Now, going back to the chart here for just a second, the big thing is we started off at $499 for this level of GPU, and now we're up to $799. There's a lot of people out there that like to throw the word inflation around and don't understand that inflation has little to no effect on anything. So let's actually look at real inflation numbers. All right, so I punched in November 2010 at $499. Now, they don't have data for September 2018, so we have to go with April. But regardless, we're only looking at $571. So inflation has very little effect on actual purchasing power. Now, granted, technology has become more expensive. So instead of $499, obviously $599 would be the relative equivalent number. And then if we threw on that extra $100 up to $699, that would easily cover the additional cost of things like GDDR6, which is just a little bit more expensive than GDDR5. It's about 33% more. Gamers Nexus did a good video on that. It's about $80 versus $60. It's not a huge difference. But using technology like 12 nanometers or 16 nanometer process, this is much, much more expensive than back in the old 28 nanometers, and I think this was 32 nanometer days there. 32 or 40. Please correct me in the comment section. I'm not sure on that one. But regardless, so even if this was at $699, that would account for both inflation and the increased cost, hands down. Now, the MSRP for this is $699. That extra $100 that they're tacking on there, that is what cannot be accounted for because the performance gain is not there. This one right here had a $100 performance increase over what everybody was expecting because its performance increase was significantly higher. That's something we are seriously not expecting to see in this new GPU. Now, that's the main argument that you see against the new RTX cards, is that they're simply too expensive. There is no ray tracing technology out there right now. There are no games that you can actually use that on, so that's completely worthless and not even worth mentioning. The numbers that we have from Nvidia do not show a significant performance increase. It's a traditional increase from, pretty much from an 80 to 80 series. 30 to 35%, as you guys saw, was pretty much normal. But the fact that the price is continuing to go up is leading people to not be interested. I mean, let's face it, you can get that level of performance in a GTX 1080 Ti, and those are selling for only $629. Not to mention you also get 3 extra gigabytes of RAM. So you get more, you pay less, and performance is relatively similar. And that's where the real problem lies. All right, time to flip this script around, because all that stuff you guys are familiar with. This is what you guys are debating in the comment sections and forums all over the internet. Now, if we take a look at the flip side here, the brand new RTX lineup is a new lineup. Going back to that chart there, I mean, you have GTX, GTX, GTX. This is RTX, meaning that I think Nvidia wanted to go ahead and separate this for a reason. This can do what these do. These cannot do what this does. Now, whether or not the technology, the new ray tracing technology, catches on, that is an unknown. What's the value of that? Right now, it's 0. As I said, there is no software for that. But simply put, this has technology that these ones don't, which means inherently this has more value simply because it can do everything that these cards do, only better, and it can do things that they can't. So, like I said, this is very much a chicken or the egg type situation. Realistically, having software that supports this new technology first before actually launching hardware to consumers would have been the smarter move. But they're not doing it that way, and here we are. This also kind of falls in line with the fact that both the Geforce GTX, which is the 10 series, will continue to be sold alongside the RTX cards. Now, there's 2 reasons for this. Obviously, Nvidia still has stock on the 10 series that they want to get rid of, so this benefits them. But realistically, not everybody wants or needs what the RTX cards can provide. So Nvidia has done everything that they can to separate RTX from GTX at this point. And that's the main reason why I believe that they focused on RTX so hard during the reveal. Now, I don't want to go too much into the nitty-gritty, but there's also a cost factor. I did mention the GDDR6. Gamers Nexus, they went ahead and figured out it costs about 33% more, up from about $60 up to about $80. So there is a price increase there. I just want to show you guys the information that I was able to dig up as far as process goes. First off, for all of you guys out there that don't understand, TSMC's 16 and 12 nanometer process are basically the same thing. They even classify them the same on their own website. The most accurate number I could find was that a 300 millimeter wafer cost about $4,800 on 16 nanometers, 16/14/12. All of them should be somewhere around that $5,000 price point. Currently, defect rate on 16 nanometers is as low or less than 0.06. It was 0.1 when production started. So this is where we're at now, 0.06. Now this becomes important because we're going to start calculating die cost. All right, so we don't know the exact die size of the RTX 2080, but we have a pretty good idea at 550 millimeters squared. So we go ahead and we take the square root of that. So it's 23.45. So you just do 23.45 and 23.45, 23.45, sorry. All right, and then we have our 300 millimeter square die, and we take our 0.06 defect rate. So that means on a 300 millimeter wafer, we're looking at approximately 70 good dies. Now, this is without harvesting and binning and other things that I know Nvidia are doing to go ahead and make sure that they get more dies per wafer, but we're just going to take this as it is for an example. So, simply put, we take 4,800 divided by 70. So that means it costs Nvidia approximately $68.57 to make a single Turing TU-104. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Like I said, that's not a hard number, but that gives you a ballpark idea of the cost. Now then, switching back, we have 314 millimeters squared on the 1080 on the exact same process. So we take 314, figure out the square root. So we're looking at 1772, 17.72, 17.72. Everything else remains the same. That means you get 147 good die on the exact same wafer. So once again, take 4,800 divided by 147. So that means it only costs $32 to build a GTX 1080 in comparison to a 2080, which was about $68. I actually forgot. It's been that quick. I should have probably saved it. But you can see that it literally does cost Nvidia twice as much to produce a TU-104. So completely ignoring that cost does not make sense. Going back to our price chart here, this costs twice as much for them to make as this, and this does not cost twice as much for you. Now, like I said, we're playing devil's advocate here. I know nobody really cares about die size, and nobody really cares what things cost to Nvidia. We only really care what things cost to us. And as consumers, that's the way things are supposed to go. But you can't ignore the fact that this GPU can do everything that these can do better than they can do it. And it can do stuff that these guys have no business even attempting in ray tracing. And considering this costs more than twice as much to produce than this, that's a pretty easy way for them to justify that $100 price increase. All right, so now that we looked at both sides of this equation, really it only comes down to one thing, and it comes down to your own individual personal opinion. Is this product, or are these products going to be right for you? Now, it comes down to, is it in your budget? Is the performance going to deliver what you want? Are you wanting to take advantage of this new technology? Are you a game developer? Are you a programmer? Is there other features on these new cards that gamers as a whole are not going to be able to take advantage of for probably several years? Are you going to be able to take advantage of that? If the answer is no, more than likely, this is probably not going to be a smart upgrade for you, and you can get a much better performance per dollar increase by getting your hands on maybe like a secondhand GTX 1080 Ti. Now, realistically, most PC gamers game on 1440p or 1080p. That's where the vast majority of gaming is. Most people do not go ahead and play on 4K. Now, the reason why I mentioned 4K a couple videos ago, you can check that out here. The reason why I brought that up and the reason why that is important is because we have GPUs today that will game just fine at 1440p. Pretty much anything from the 1070 Ti and Vega 56 on up are more than capable enough to handle 1440p in today and near future games. So the only real reason why you would want to upgrade and need more performance over what we currently have is because you're running games in 4K. If you're running 1440p or lower, there's simply no reason to need a more powerful graphics card. I mean, you can go ahead and get yourself, like I said, a 1080 Ti for $600-ish brand new, or probably around $500 on eBay. You don't need more than that for 1440p. And this is where Nvidia came into play, because they know that most people don't really care about 4K. So how else are they going to pitch their new products? You don't need more performance for 1440p or 1080p. Those resolutions are already covered. So their decision was to go a different direction and offer more and new visual fidelity that you simply can't get anywhere else. So that's pretty much how I see both sides of this argument. I understand Nvidia's side. I understand that they want to push technology in a new direction. They don't really care about higher resolution, nor do they care about higher frame rate. If you want that, the RTX cards will still provide greater than or equal performance to the 10 series counterparts that they had. Now, they're going to cost a lot more money. So, I mean, it has new technology. They're trying to push higher fidelity graphics, not faster graphics. Seems most gamers out there, for whatever reason, really want faster graphics when it's really unnecessary. A 1080 Ti is going to push pretty much everything at 120 frames per second at 1440p. And the few games that it doesn't, you can just tweak settings and you should be fine. Well, alrighty guys, that's all I have for today. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Really curious to hear your thoughts on this. And if you like this video, please hit that like button, please subscribe, please share with friends. That really helps me out. And that's all I have for today, and I will catch you guys in the next video.